Your mother is gone, your father is gone. You are 6 years old, alone, in a world with predators in the dark and no walls to hide behind. Today we have a word for this: orphan, a tragedy, a child the system has to scramble to catch before they fall. But for most of human history, the child who lost both parents didn't fall at all. In fact, they were often barely more vulnerable than the child sitting right beside them. And the reason has nothing to do with luck. It's a truth about your own childhood you were probably never told. By the time we're done, you'll see why the modern family quietly made losing your parents more dangerous than it ever was in the Stone Age. But first, let me show you something that shouldn't exist. In a cave in southern Italy, archaeologists found a skeleton. A young man buried around 10,000 years ago, and his bones told an impossible story. He had a severe form of dwarfism. His arms were too short to hunt. His body couldn't keep up with the group, couldn't run down prey, couldn't carry its own weight. By every harsh rule we imagine about the ancient world, he should have died as a child. He lived into adulthood, which means for years, people who had no reason to feed him fed him anyway. The place is called Romito Cave, and that single skeleton cracks open everything you think you know about how ancient humans treated the weak. So hold that boy in your mind, because to understand why an orphan survived, you first have to understand why he did. Start with a simple question: who fed you when you were small? You'll say your mother, maybe your father, and you wouldn't be wrong, but you wouldn't be telling the whole story. Because humans are strange among animals. A mother chimpanzee carries her infant almost constantly, and rarely lets another adult touch it for years. A human mother hands her newborn to other people within hours. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, cousins, people with no blood tie at all. An anthropologist named Sarah Blaffer HRDY spent decades on this single pattern. She gave it a name: cooperative breeding. It means human children were never built to be raised by two people alone. They were built to be raised by a crowd. But here's the strange part. If every adult helped raise every child, why didn't exhausted parents simply walk away from their own? Why didn't the ancient world drown in abandoned babies? Hold that question. The answer flips this entire story, and we will come back to it. For now, just sit with what cooperative breeding means. The nuclear family, one mother and one father behind one closed door, is not the ancient design. It's a recent invention. For hundreds of thousands of years, a child didn't belong to a couple. A child belonged to the band. So go back, you're 6, your parents are gone, what actually happens to you? Almost nothing changes about who feeds you. Because you were never being fed by only them. This is the part that breaks the modern brain. In a band of 30 people, an orphan still had a grandmother slipping them roots, still had an aunt who nursed them beside her own baby, still had older kids dragging them on a foraging trip. The web holding you up didn't have 2 threads, it had 30. HRDY called these other caregivers alloparents. Allo means other parents, and human children evolved to expect them. And those other parents may be the reason your entire species exists. Nobody expected this next part. An anthropologist named Kristen Hawkes was studying the Hadza, hunter-gatherers in Tanzania who still forage much like ancient humans once did. She went looking for the hardest workers in the group. It wasn't the young hunters. It was the old women. Grandmothers, long past childbearing age, digging tubers from sunrise to sundown, and handing most of that food to children who weren't theirs to feed. Hawkes built a theory from it: the grandmother hypothesis. The idea that human women live for decades past their fertile years for a reason almost no other animal shares. Because a grandmother who survives keeps her grandchildren alive, and a child fed by a grandmother frees the mother to have the next one. A human grandmother is a survival machine. And to an orphan, she was a safety net nobody even had to plan. But that's not even the strangest part. Among those same Hadza, the anthropologist Frank Marlowe measured exactly where children got their food. A huge share of it didn't come from parents at all. It came from the group, from foraging beside other kids, from scraps passed around the fire, from a dozen hands that were never moms or dads. A child in that world wasn't fed by a pipeline from two people. They were fed by a current flowing from everywhere at once. So take the parents out of that picture. The current keeps flowing. Let's reconstruct one day so you can feel it. The band wakes at dawn. The orphaned boy his parents lost to sickness one hard winter opens his eyes in a shelter that isn't empty. An older woman is already awake, scraping a hide. She doesn't ask whether the boy is hers. She breaks off a strip of dried meat and hands it to him, because that is what you do with a hungry child in front of you. He spends the day with the other children, half wild, learning to track, to dig, to throw. No one assigns him a guardian. The whole band is his guardian without ceremony, without a word. At night he sleeps in a warm pile of bodies, no different from any other child in the heap. He isn't the orphan, he's just one of the children. Now here's the twist that changes everything. If ancient bands caught their orphans this easily, why does the word orphan crush us today? Why the institutions, the tragic stories, the heavy ache around a parentless child? Because somewhere the web got cut. When humans began farming around 12,000 years ago, something quiet and enormous happened to the family. People stopped living in fluid bands of 30 and started living in households. Walls went up. Property appeared. The line between my child and your child, blurry for 300,000 years, suddenly mattered, because now there was land and grain to inherit. The one big shared net fractured into separate households, each guarding its own. And the further down that road we went, the more a child's survival hung on two specific adults staying alive. By the time you reach the modern family, two parents, one home, the grandmother in another city, the aunt's a phone call away. A child who loses those two people has lost almost everything. We didn't invent orphanhood. We invented its loneliness. Now, remember the question I told you to hold. If everyone raised every child, why didn't parents abandon their own? Here's the answer. Because no parent ever carried the full weight alone. A human child is brutally expensive. The enormous brain, the endless childhood, the long years before it can feed itself. No two people could ever pay that cost by themselves. So the band spread it across 30 pairs of hands, and the load on any single parent stayed light enough to bear. Parents didn't abandon their children because the weight of a child never became unbearable. It was shared too thin to crush anyone. And that is the exact same reason the orphan lived. The cost of a parentless child was just as light, just as spread out, just as easy for the group to quietly absorb. The same machinery that kept parents from breaking is the machinery that caught the children who lost them. And the ground proves it again and again. At a site called Sunghir in Russia, two children were buried 34,000 years ago beneath thousands of carved ivory beads, each bead hours of patient labor. You don't bury a disposable child like that. You bury a child the whole group treasured. At Shanidar in Iraq, a Neanderthal lived for years badly injured and disabled. Someone protected him. Someone shared food with him. The weak were not simply left behind. These aren't the leavings of a species that throws away its fragile members. They're the fingerprints of cooperative breeding, pressed into bone and grave. So what does this mean for you, sitting in a house, in a century that turned orphan into a synonym for tragedy? It means the loneliness you feel, whether you're raising children or remembering being raised, is not your failure. It's a design mismatch. Your brain still expects the 30 threads, the grandmother in the next shelter, The aunt who takes the baby when your arms give out. The cousins who haul the little ones along unasked. When people say it takes a village to raise a child, they aren't being sentimental. They're naming the literal evolutionary machinery of your species. Machinery we took apart, piece by piece, and then wondered why doing it alone feels impossible. So go back one last time. A child, 6 years old, both parents gone. In our world, that is where the tragedy begins. In theirs, the woman by the fire was already awake, already reaching out a strip of meat. Your mother is gone, your father is gone. But the child survived. Because no one ever asked, whose child is this? They only asked, is this child hungry?